Hello, my spookies. It's me, your host and narrator, Henrik Kuto. I want to thank you so much for listening to the show right here on YouTube, but I want to inform you that this will be the last episode of Weekly Spooky that we post directly to YouTube. So, if you want to stick around with the show and keep listening every week, especially as we release bonus content throughout October, well, you just got to go to WeeklySpooky.com or search Weekly Spooky on your favorite podcasting app, and you'll get not only the main show, but you'll get Terrifying and True, Monthly Spooky, and so much more. Twice as many programs every single week. So head over to WeeklySpooky.com and listen there. It helps support the show far more than listening to it on YouTube. Now, enjoy the show. It's Halloween now. The spooky season. There's a cold chill in the air, and you're riding your bike alone in the woods, hoping to make friends and get treats. But something or someone is waiting for you.
There's a chill in the air. Must be fall. Join me for a tale of Halloween. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Henrik Kuto, and my goodness, it is our time of year. Oh my yes, spooky season is upon us, and I'm here to simply add a little flavor to your terror. And we have a great piece of fear tonight. Oh my, it's positively folklorish. But before we get to the story, I just want to say thank you for giving us a listen. Make sure you're subscribed because we have so many more fearful pieces to read to you this October and beyond. Every Monday and Wednesday, we have something to whet your spooky appetite. And if you really enjoy the show and want to help us out just a little bit, go to your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else, and leave us a star rating. It really helps people discover the show, and it won't cost you anything. But if you want to take one step beyond, you can go to WeeklySpooky.com, and for as little as $1 a month, join our Patreon. The Patreon provides you an inside look into the show, bonus episodes, and a whole lot more. Just go to WeeklySpooky.com and click on Patreon. We're at 88 backers. Can you help us make it to 100? Oh, and by the way, I have a pretty cool announcement coming after the story, so make sure you stick around. But for now, the wind really is getting chilly. So get comfortable for this story after a few messages from our sponsors. Dullahan by Morgan Moore. Halloween night. It's a night where fun can be had, as well as mischief. In ancient folklore, it is a night where the planes of existence open up. A night of thrills where anyone can be anybody, or anything. At this moment, however, Isaiah Crane was late. The young man was expected at a costume party his classmates were holding. He was considered the guest of honor. Isaiah was the new kid in Yatesville, and he quickly learned through the other kids and even the adults that he bore an uncanny resemblance to a man of local legend, Gerald Johnson. Johnson was infamous for having been convicted of witchcraft and executed by decapitation for the crime. Whether he did or did not practice witchcraft was a matter of debate, like many other witch hunt victims. None of this mattered to Isaiah, however. All that mattered to him was getting to the party. Being the new kid wasn't easy, and he hadn't yet made any real friends. His invite to the party came as a genuine surprise, as he didn't think anybody really knew him. What made the invitation even more surprising was that it came from a girl named Phoebe Hart. Phoebe was Isaiah's crush, and he couldn't help but take up the invitation just to hang out with her. He found it odd that they wanted him to dress up as Johnson, but if they thought he looked like the guy, and if Phoebe thought it would be fun, then he would do it. Unfortunately, things weren't going as well as he had hoped. His costume had to be homemade, an understandable circumstance, but Isaiah was afraid he would look drabby compared to the other kids. Adding on to that was the fact that Isaiah had to bike his way to the party. He had planned on riding through the streets of town, but a downtown party for the older residents made that next to impossible to do. His next best option was to take the bike path. All would be fine if he knew how to traverse it to get to his destination. Isaiah pedaled on, desperately trying to get to the party, to his chance to make friends, to fit in, to be with Phoebe. He went faster and faster, trees blurring by while he rode. Too fast, though. His pant leg caught on the pedal. He shouted in aggression and disbelief. The speed was much too high, and Isaiah lost control of the bike as the pedal came to a stop. It turned and twisted off to the side. The front wheel slammed into the curb of the trail and threw Isaiah off the bike and into the tree line. Isaiah laid on the ground in pain. In his head, he started counting backwards from 10 and recited various phone numbers he knew to make sure he didn't have any head trauma. After he was sure his head was all right, Isaiah slowly stood up and started checking himself for any more injuries. He felt blood on his forehead and hands. Along his shirt sleeves and pants legs, he found multiple rips. His limbs underneath sure to have cuts and bruises. Nothing seemed to be wrong with his chest or back as he pressed his hand against them. The only real pain he felt was in his ankle where his pants leg had gotten caught. Overall, he wasn't too banged up. The young man began to carefully walk the area he had been thrown to, trying to find his bike and his way back to the path. He sighed as he stumbled around in the dark, unsure really of where he was. While the flight from the bike didn't send him deep into the wooded part of town, it did put him at a good distance from the trail. With only the faintest shimmers of moonlight to aid him, Isaiah continued on his hunt. He walked in the dark towards what he thought was the way he came from. As he walked, the wind picked up and brought a chill with it. Isaiah shuddered at the sudden coldness, his costume not giving him much protection from the elements. Leaves danced around him as he continued on. The wind continued to pick up, no longer making the leaves dance, but plastered them to his face. He pulled them away only for them to return moments later. It got louder and more forceful as it continued to pick up. Isaiah soon found himself being pushed around by the wind as if it was leading him somewhere. The wind stopped suddenly. Isaiah, having closed his eyes to protect them from the leaves, opened them, finding himself in a small clearing. He stood there, taking in the silence of the night. The moon, once hidden, was now clear as daylight, providing him with a light source to see his surroundings. It was then that he heard a thunderous sound. Isaiah looked around frantically to find the source. The sound reminded him of horses racing down a track. It grew closer and closer. The closer it came, the louder it got. Suddenly, through the trees came the source. A tar-black horse with eyes that glowed like hellfire. Sitting atop the horse was a man, or what was once a man. His body was dressed in navy attire, reminiscent of a pilgrim, a black coat draping around his shoulder. The only difference between this man and any other was his lack of a head. Isaiah stared in awe of the thing before him, just as suddenly as the horseman appeared and stopped before him. It now started again, charging towards Isaiah at inhuman speed. The teenager bolted into the tree line to escape the hellish being. It followed him into the woods, riding so hard and so fast, it was as if it was burning the land as it went. The boy continued to run as the horseman thundered behind him. Suddenly, Isaiah felt a sting on his cheek. He touched his skin and felt the warm stickiness of blood oozing from his face. Isaiah looked behind him and found the horseman with an arm held high and a whip tightly clenched in his hand. He wasn't sure, but it looked to Isaiah that the whip was made from something that looked like a spine. His pursuer cracked it again and struck Isaiah's shoulder. Isaiah tumbled forward to a stop. He quickly picked himself back up and continued his escape, the horseman now closer than ever. Isaiah kept running through the woods with the horseman on his heels. His legs grew more and more tired, his lungs burning and his body covered in sweat and blood from his wounds. The ankle he had hurt from his bike crash throbbed with pain. If this kept up, he was sure to be a goner. In the distance, Isaiah saw an opening in the woods. He smiled in hope that it would lead to his safety. The boy threw all of his energy into one final mad dash towards the opening. Isaiah burst through it to find a cabin. He approached the building and noticed a sign by the front steps, denoting it to be a museum devoted to the witch hunts and trials. Before he could process everything, he heard the shriek of the horse. He spun around and saw the horseman galloping towards him. Isaiah instinctively ran up the stairs to the door, using his good leg to kick it open. Isaiah flicked the lights on and was greeted with an array of relics, pictures, and various odds and ends related to the witch hunts. The teenager walked around trying to find something to aid him. His pursuer did not give him much time. As Isaiah was looking at a display case of antiques, the horseman burst in, horse and all, tearing apart the entrance. Isaiah whipped around to see the horseman himself. Its horse cried out in anger, and the rider cracked its whip. The horseman strode slowly towards its prey. Isaiah walked backwards, trapped with no exit in sight. He found himself up against an odd-shaped item. The boy turned around and discovered a row of wax heads. A quick glance at the placards under them revealed that they were sculptures of those who were executed. One in particular caught Isaiah's attention. It was of Gerald Johnson. Johnson had been beheaded for his execution. Could it be? A crack and a cry from the horse brought Isaiah back to the situation at hand. The horseman was getting closer and closer. Isaiah had an idea, a hope. He grabbed hold of Gerald Johnson's head and pulled it off its stand. Isaiah turned around and found the horseman right in front of him. The horse breathed onto Isaiah, filling the boy's nose with the scent of decades-old decay. Isaiah said a small prayer before holding up the wax head of Johnson. The horseman slowly lowered his whip, placing it on his hip. With both hands, he took the sculpture from the boy and placed it on his shoulders. The head began to meld to the horseman's body, and a smile formed on the wax lips. The smile quickly faded, and the horseman started to claw at his throat. Isaiah watched, confused. It suddenly hit him that the head being wax meant it wouldn't have any openings for a person to breathe. The horseman pointed at Isaiah's head angrily. It must have really been Gerald Johnson, and he wanted his head. Or the next best thing, Isaiah's. Isaiah ran from the wax heads with the horseman on his heels. His plan failed, and now his pursuer was angrier and more hell-bent to kill him. In his rush, Isaiah tripped over a display the horseman had knocked down and landed face first on the floor. He looked over towards a fallen table and noticed an old lantern. Isaiah crawled over to it and discovered a small book of matches sitting next to it, with the logo of the museum on the front. The boy took one look inside of the lantern, saw a heavily used candle, and instantly knew what to do. He grabbed the lantern and the matches and quickly scrambled to his feet. Isaiah ran out onto the porch and fumbled to get the matches out and lit. Once they were ignited, he threw them into the lantern. He watched the candle catch on fire, illuminating the dark. Isaiah looked to the door and saw the charging glow of the horse's eyes. He waited until he saw the horseman, saw the wax visage. Once he saw it clear as day, he threw the lantern at the wax head. "Please, God." The glass broke, and the candle fell on top of the horseman's head. Instantly, the head caught on fire. As quick as it had started, it just as quickly spread down the rest of the horseman and onto the horse. The creature thrashed around in agony, spreading the fire all about the cabin. Isaiah ran off of the porch and beelined to an opening he spotted behind the house. He ran with all of the energy he had left, not daring to look behind him. His only comfort was that he didn't hear the horseman coming. The young man continued to run, his eyes spotting an opening in the trees ahead. Isaiah burst through the trees and fell over his feet onto the pavement. He stood up and turned around to face the trees from where he had come. His eyes widened. The fire had grown from the cabin to the woods around it. It was a horrific sight, but also one that gave Isaiah a great comfort. Comfort that he was safe. Isaiah walked for what seemed like an eternity. He had a limp from all the pain in his ankle, making his already slow trek that much longer. Listlessly, he walked through the streets and into a neighborhood. Trick-or-treating had long been over, but yards were still decorated with store-bought displays and toilet paper from kids who had been rowdy that night. "Isaiah!" A voice, feminine, called out to him. The boy stopped and turned to where the voice had come from. It was Phoebe. She ran up to him and gasped a little at the state he was in. "You're late. I was worried. It looks like I was right, too. What happened?" Phoebe asked. "Oh, yeah, I guess I am late. I crashed my bike and got lost in the woods. I got out, but, I'm new. I don't know where everything is yet. Guess I got lucky that I ended up here," Isaiah explained. "Yeah, you are," Phoebe smiled. She took his hand and the two kids started to head back to the house and to the party. "You should really learn the town and how to get around. You could lose your head getting lost." Isaiah smiled a little and laughed to himself. Nearly did. I feel like that was probably the best way to start our Halloween season. A little piece of fear you might have heard or told your friends at a sleepover. I sure enjoyed it, and I'm glad you did too. Alright, so I'm going to stop stalling and tell you what my special announcement is. Myself and my good friend David Denoyer are starting a brand new podcast for those of you who love horror films and the celebration of such. It's called Welcome to Prime Time, a Freddy's Nightmares retrospective. And that's right, it's a show where we watch every episode of the TV series Freddy's Nightmares, which many people don't even remember Freddy Krueger being a part of. It's a whole lot of fun, so if you want to check it out, we have a new episode every Tuesday, and the first episode just released at freddysnightmares.com, or you can search Welcome to Primetime on your favorite podcast app. But of course, just because I'm doing that show doesn't mean I won't be right back here next Wednesday to scare you. You're the folks who keep making me come back. And speaking of those folks, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay just a little bit more to hear their names on the show. And they are Christopher Sullivan, Brent McCullough, Gino Lyons, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, Jeff and George Hilton, Craig Cohen, and Kevin Fry. Thank you all so much, and if you want to be a part of our Patreon, we sure would appreciate it. And we'll give you lots of exclusives and bonus material to enjoy. Just go to WeeklySpooky.com and click on Patreon. But for now, my friends, I've got to go carve some jack-o'-lanterns. So make sure to keep the spooky spirit alive until I see you again. Because if you don't, I'll know. So for myself, for our executive producer Rob Fields, our producer Dan Wilder, and our composer Ray Mattis, I will talk at you next time.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.